starting a new study for a few weeks on the founding of America, the religious influence on the founding of America, separating fact from fiction. There are some wonderful resources that are available. There's a website. Let me tell you that website. You want to write this down. It's called Wall Builders. One word, Wall Builders. WALLBUILDERS. Wall Builders. And you can Google it, look it up, go to the website. They have all these things. This marvelous little booklet here is called America's Godly Heritage. And he gives you a lot of good information in there. This one is called The Spiritual Heritage. It's a tour of the United States Capitol. You can actually take this book if you go there and use it as a guide when you take the tour. But it tells you about all the things in the Capitol that have a religious connection. You'd be surprised at how much of a connection there is there. This book is called Celebrate Liberty. This is famous patriotic speeches. The historians all scream and holler, let's talk about what they actually said and did. Well, he puts it in here for us. He has some annotations, notes about it, but he actually has the speeches. And this book is a biography of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. It's all about who they were. Okay, so you will actually know. One of the most popular pamphlets, at that time, a lot of things were printed in pamphlets. That's how they communicated ideas. And one of the most popular ones of that time is Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And all of those pamphlets are available today. I'll be giving you a handout next week or the week after, or probably next week, that lists all of the papers called the Federalist Papers, which were articles or essays, pamphlets written when they were discussing the Constitution. And you can look those up. I'm going to actually give you just one of them I printed out for you that you'll have. But you can look them up. You don't have to buy them. You can actually look them up online and read them if you like. Most of them are available online. And there are books. I think Barnes & Noble for like $5. You can get a book with all of the Federalist Papers in places like that. They're real cheap. So there's a lot of good information out there. I pass along to say to you that we have solid documentation. One of the things that he will use in this book and in some of the others is the actual congressional record. Okay? So people will say, how do you know that's true? It's in the congressional record. So if it's a lie in the congressional record. So why would they put a lie in there? So it's actually in there. All those things are kept back to the date, the meeting of the first Congress. They kept records. And it's called the Congressional Record. It is available through the Library of Congress. If you have the time and the money and you want to go there and sit down, you can go all the way back to the beginning and do the investigation study for yourself. There's some things to keep in mind. First of all, we need to know who the principal characters are, and I'm going to mention three. There are a lot more than three, but these are the three you hear the most about because they played significant roles. Barbara? The first one, of course, is George Washington. And George Washington was the first president of the United States, but before he went into that role, he played a major role as a leader. He was an educated man, quite a speaker, and he played a significant role in the leadership of this nation moving toward independence, along with speaking and writing. And then, of course, he played a significant role of being the commander-in-general of the armed forces in the fight for independence in the United States. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, historians went back and one of them uncovered and wrote a book on his spy network. And they made a TV series about it. It was on television. I watched a few episodes of it. He actually had a spy network in New York and New Jersey, spying on the British, and some of them lost their lives doing it. So there was a CIA way before there was a CIA. Okay? The point is that these people realized what they were doing, what they were up against. A second person you hear a lot about is Jefferson. And you know, he also became a president. Jefferson was the writer, primarily charged with writing. And he had a lot to do with forming ideas of how things ought to be. And they argued back and forth. You know, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists argued back and forth on some of the ideas. We're going to talk about why. And Jefferson played a primary role. He was one of the main writers of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution of the United States of America. And then the third one, of course, is Madison. Madison also was a great writer. He was a Federalist, but he was concerned about a number of issues and wrote about them extensively in the Federalist Papers. He was the author of the Federalist Papers, the vast majority of the Federalist Papers. And he was the author of much of the amendments of the Constitution. As you know, the Constitution was passed. In order to get it passed, they had to agree to the amendments. That first set of amendments had to be passed with it in order to get the votes, because they were concerned about the power of the federal government. And they wanted some balance there for the rights of citizens, because they knew what it was like to be under the rule of a monarch, a king, and how individual rights had been eroded. And so they wanted to ensure that in this new experiment, that's what they called it, democracy, an experiment, because nobody had ever done it before, that the rights of the individuals were protected. And you know what the First Amendment is, and I'm going to give you a handout on that later. But the First Amendment says that Congress can't pass any law. Cannot. Absolute. That will abridge freedom of religion or freedom of the press. Can't do that. The certain things that are protected that they thought were indispensable. Now, why would they make the first one about religion if that was not seen as important to them? And we'll talk about why it was. Okay. And of course, the landmark documents. The first is the Declaration of Independence, as you know. A lot of people the document was presented, and 2 people signed it on July the 4th. Okay? The rest of them didn't sign it till August. They couldn't get there. You couldn't hop in the car, get on the plane and get there. Took a while, horse and buggy. But it was fine. They all agreed to it. They just couldn't get there to put their signatures on it till August. But it was signed. And this statement was profoundly important because of its impact and what it was saying. If you've never read it, please go back and read it again. It's very, very important. Unfortunately, I don't think most people know what this says, and I'm not sure they teach it very well these days in school, and why this becomes such an important thing. This is basically a rationale given to the king for why they wanted to be free. And declaring their freedom. By the way, prior to this document, there was a group that met together to affirm this same idea. Anybody know where that was at? I'll give you a hint. It was in this state.
Raleigh.
No. Historic Halifax. It was called the Halifax Resolves. You can look it up. So just prior to the Declaration. But the ideas were fomenting about how do we become independent. And they had to make a statement. This statement, by signing it, they were committing treason. Do you understand that? And most of them paid a high price for this. So this is in 1776. Barbara, the next one. The other landmark document, of course, is the Constitution of the United States and Bill of Rights. Constitution, as you know, took some time. It took a little while before this document was before this document was written, was finalized, because there was so much debate over it, and they finally came up with the formal document September the 17th, 1787, when they finally agreed on the Constitution, on the document itself, and got it written. It was not ratified. That is, they didn't have the votes to pass it, to agree to it, and it was finally voted on June 21st, 1788, and it became in effect by vote January the 1st, 1789. So from 1776, the Declaration of Independence, until the Constitution becomes the law of the land, is 13 years. Okay? Just so you'll know that. All right. In order to understand some things about this era of time, you must understand the background. And so I've given you a few documents tonight as we get started to help you with that. The first is definitions. Okay? Let me go over these with you so you can understand them. Now, the terminology here for this era of time, please take all the notes you want. This is sociological terms. Historians use a variety of terms. They would call the first age antiquity, okay, or prehistory. Sociologists call it pre-modernism, because sociologists look at how society functioned. In the pre-modern age, what was the primary way of communicating? Oral. Okay? What sets the modern age apart from pre-modern is the modern age begins with the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg, because it made it possible for us to be able to print rapidly and get information in people's hands quickly. Prior to that, everything had to be copied by hand. That meant you had to have people that were scholars that learned how to read and write who could do that. But it was painstaking to sit there and copy. One of the things you'll see if you go see the tour of the Dead Sea Scrolls and watch the video is that in those, and he showed it in our Sunday school video when Vanderland was there, they had a room there in Qumran called the Scriptorum where they sat on benches and copied the scrolls of the Bible. Okay? But the pre-modern age, it was all done by oral or handwritten. And since the vast majority of people were uneducated, it was mostly oral. Education, formal education, developed in the Grecian Empire, the Greeks. And if you remember, they're the ones who mastered and taught the art of rhetoric, which was an oral form of argumentation. It's later that they began to write things down. But pre-modern is oral, handwritten. Modern age with Gutenberg is the age of the printing press. And sociologists generally date it this way. Pre-modern age is from the beginning of time, that we know of, the history of the time we know of, that we have documentation for, to Gutenberg, inventor of the printing press, which is in the 1650s, by the way. 1650s. The modern age, modernism, goes from Gutenberg to Google. So, literally. Because Google, it's metaphorical. It means the computer age. Because now information has changed. Do y'all know that readership and subscriptions to newspapers has dropped off 40% in this country? Not many people read newspapers anymore. They get it all on the internet. And by the way, most people want to be able to read their news in 2 paragraphs or less. They don't read long things anymore. I mean, after all, what is it on Twitter? 180 characters or less or something like that. So we've abbreviated that. And unfortunately, we abbreviate our knowledge when we do that as well. Because it takes a little more reading and study to know all these things. So when you see these people who are, educated folks on television and they ask a question and they'll say, well, so, and then they'll give you an answer that's about 2 paragraphs long, which doesn't really answer the question. Because they don't know how to answer the question. Most of the time, they really don't. It blows my mind. Postmodernism began, of course, with the computer age. Modernism, Gutenberg to Google, postmodern, computer age, the world has changed. Along with, of course, with the technology that come along, in the postmodern age, there's a skeptical interpretation of culture, art, literature, philosophy, history, economics, architecture, fiction, and literary criticism. Why? The postmodernist mindset says that all of the previous interpretations of these things is not relevant to us because we have a different worldview. Therefore, it has to be reinterpreted. Sociologists and historians often refer to that as deconstruction. We deconstruct it in order to change it to make it make sense for us the way we want it to make sense. Okay? Now, deconstruction is a loaded term because some deconstructionists actually deny things that are historical facts. That's called deconstructing history. But what we're talking about is what they're saying is we want to reinterpret it to suit us. And that's reconstruction, deconstruction, and reconstruction of history or sociological events, so forth and so on. And so they will go back and say, well, this business about Jefferson or Madison talking about God, that really didn't mean that they were believers. Jefferson was a deist after all. He would not have had any notion that we're going to be talking about God when we're talking about government. That's a deconstructionist idea. But that's not true. And ample evidence that that's not true. But you see, deconstructionists can ignore what they don't want to pay attention to. Doesn't matter. Why? Because we've reconstructed to interpret it the way we want it. And that's why it's important for you to understand these things. Pluralism, some additional terms. Pluralism is the philosophical perspective that all paths are equally valid. In the postmodern age, in the modern age, what that meant was all ideas were welcome on the table for discussion. We need to look at all of them. We need to talk about them all. But in the postmodern age, remember deconstruction, it means all of them are equally valid. Therefore, when Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, nobody comes to the Father but by me, he's not saying that's the only way. Because the way of Buddha is an equal path to God. The way of the Krishnas, the way of the Hindus, we've talked about all these different religions, remember? They're all equal. So what happens when you take that approach? There is no judgment. There is no condemnation. There is no hell. And Lenin captured that well. He said, imagine, there's no heaven, there's no hell. That's a perfectly clear deconstructionist concept. Okay? But these men didn't see it that way. You study them, you're going to find out very quickly they don't understand how you build a society on that mindset. It was alien to their way of thinking. Theocracy is a form of government in which God or a deity of some type is recognized as the king or immediate ruler, and all laws are taken as the statute book of the kingdom, usually being administered by a priestly order of some type. We talked about that with Islam. Remember, the Quran is the law of the land, Sharia, the law of the land, imposed by the mullahs, all right, and the Ayatollahs, and so forth, and Islamic courts. Theocentrism is the belief that God is a central aspect to our existence, as opposed to anthropocentrism. That's human-centered. Anthro means human. Anthropology, study of human beings. Or existentialism, existence. That philosophy developed in the early part of the 20th century called existentialism, and its whole idea was that our existence, what we can see, is what should determine who we are and what we need to know about life. Existentialism was both a religious philosophy, that came about, but also a sociological philosophy. We need to understand our existence. Isn't it interesting that those things happened, but it didn't make life better? We're still fighting the same battles, culturally, that we were fighting. In fact, it's worse. It's actually worse. It's made it worse. Because none of those, once you enter that postmodern age of deconstruction, you have no basis for a morality, system of morality. It becomes relative. Whatever you say is right for you. Whatever you say is wrong for you. But I have the right to make up my own mind about those things too. Because remember, you can't have any absolutes. Postmodernism does away with absolutes. Does away with them. Because you can't if you got absolutes, you can't go back and reinterpret it, can you? Can't deconstruct it. Okay? Can't have any absolutes. It's also important to understand these three terms, the next three. Theism, from the Greek theos, which means God, is a belief in the existence of a God or gods, especially belief in one God as creator of the universe, intervening in and sustaining a personal relation to his creatures. That's theism. Okay? Christianity is a theistic religion. Remember we talked about it? Monotheistic. The worship of one God. Okay, that's theism. Deism, from the Latin deus, is the belief that reason and observation of the natural world are sufficient to determine the existence of a creator, accompanied with the rejection of authority as the source of religious knowledge. Deism gained prominence in the 17th and 18th centuries during the Age of Enlightenment, especially in Britain, France, Germany, and in the United States. Among intellectuals raised as Christians who believed in one God but found fault with organized religion and did not believe in supernatural events such as miracles, the inerrancy of scriptures, or the Trinity. Jefferson was a deist. And he produced a New Testament that was void of the miracles of Jesus. Just took the miracles out and everything else. Okay? He didn't believe in Jesus as a personal Savior, but rather as the model of ethical behavior. Okay? He was a deist. Okay? That does not mean he denied the significance of Judeo-Christian moral perspective. Okay? He did. Of course, atheism, in a broad sense, means the rejection of belief in the existence of deities. And in a narrower sense, atheism is specifically the position there are no deities. And of course, inclusively, atheism is the absence of belief that any deities exist. Trouble with atheism is it is incoherent. It's very difficult to make a coherent argument for atheism, and from a variety of perspectives. And please note that in the last 30 years, a whole lot of people who were atheists have done a complete turnaround. A lot of it had to do with science itself. They thought they really believed that science, this was Enlightenment thinking, deconstruction. They really thought science would liberate people from the notion of religion. What did Marx call it? The opiate of the people. It would be liberated from it, and we wouldn't need religion anymore because science would take care of everything. But science has flip-flopped on them. I heard a top scientist from the University of Southern California a few years ago say that for 50 years, scientists fought to prove the Big Bang because it would prove that God didn't create the world and everything happened as an accident of nature, course of events. They proved the Big Bang was true, but it proved that there was a God. So now they're arguing, trying to unprove the Big Bang. It came back to bite him, as he said, in the hindquarters. Because when you go to messing with that stuff, you're messing with God. And there's a growing number of scientists now who are coming to believe, by the way. Growing number. So those are some definitions you need to keep in mind. Get them with you. Here's some quotes from some of these people. Just to show you, okay, how their thinking was. You can say, well, they didn't say that. Well, yeah, they did. We have the documentation of the quotes. Okay? You can look them up. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim tribute to patriotism who would labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. These firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in the exclusion of religious principles. George Washington. Washington taught, as did Jefferson, as did Madison and others, that democracy could not work without a moral foundation. Why? It is amoral. It has no morality of its own. It's simply a system of ideas. Okay? It has to have a morality in order for it to work, because what happens without a morality? Power goes into the hands of the few. It becomes oligarchy. Whoever can get the power and hold on to it, by influence, by election, by money, guess what? That's where we are today. That's what's happened to us today. We lost that moral foundation. Those original people, they were servants. They didn't go in there for a career. They served and they went home. Okay? And Washington could have stayed longer. He was a hero. Everybody loved Washington. He could have stayed in there for life. He had a life tenure. But Washington said, no, it's not good for the country. You can read his farewell address. Okay? So, they understood the importance of this. By the way, in case you don't know this, George Washington was a Freemason. He was a Mason. And he laid a lot of the cornerstones of the buildings that they laid during his time were done with Masonic ceremonies. And there are pictures of him in his Masonic regalia. He definitely was a Mason. So was Harry Truman, by the way. A lot of people don't know the number of presidents who actually were members of the Masonic Lodge. Okay. Jefferson, God who gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed the conviction that liberties are a gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. That's a deist saying that. Okay? It is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand. The only foundation of a free constitution is pure virtue. And if this cannot be inspired into our people in a greater measure than they have it now, they may change their rulers and the forms of government, but they will not obtain a lasting liberty. John Adams.
Y'all know he went on to be president. Great leader. He's another one of those. I didn't put his picture up there, but he's one of them. And what does he say? It is religion and morality alone which can establish principles upon which the Constitution can stand. That's what he's talking about there. Listen to this one. The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Benjamin Franklin. Franklin read the Bible. By the way, Franklin had a little magazine that went out called Poor Richard's Almanac. And he had a lot of witticisms in there. But he is so thoroughly read in the Bible and quoted it so much that a lot of people thought everything he said came from the Bible. He had sayings such as, a penny saved is a penny earned. That's not in the Bible. God helps those who help themselves. That's not in the Bible. But people think it is because Ben Franklin had it in Poor Richard's Almanac. And there are a bunch more, by the way. So he also got credited with inventing electricity. He did not invent electricity. It's always been there. Light has always been there. He just proved that, you can make light and electricity run down the string. He proved some things you could do with it. So, lucky he didn't get killed. Were my soul trembling on the wing of eternity, were this hand freezing to death, were my voice choking with the last struggle, I would still, with the last gasp of that voice, implore you to remember the truth. God has given America to be free. Patrick Henry. That's the guy who said, give me liberty or give me death. That's him. Okay? And here are some more. Now, some of these are not founding fathers, but they are leaders throughout history who had quotes about this to show you how the pattern continues. They studied their founding fathers. And where is it is the duty of all nations as well as men. By the way, you got to remember back there when they used the term men, it was inclusive. It meant men and women. They didn't understand political correctness back then. Okay. And where is the duty of nations as well as men to own their dependence upon the overruling power of God, to confess their sins and transgressions and humble sorrow, yet with assured hope that genuine repentance will lead to mercy and pardon, and to recognize the sublime truth announced in the Holy Scriptures and proven by all history, that those nations only are blessed whose God is the Lord. Abraham Lincoln. Can you imagine a president saying that in the White House today? Lincoln said it. Read his stuff. You'd be surprised how much he quotes religion. Lincoln read the Bible thoroughly. Some historians believe Lincoln had a conversion experience about that period of time in his life. He had a real conversion experience. Let us look forward to the time we can take the flag of our country and nail it to the cross. And there let it wave as it waved in the olden times, and let us gather around it and inscribe for our motto, liberty and union, one and inseparable, now and forever, and exclaim, Christ first, our country next. Andrew Johnson. You ever heard of that guy? Where was he from?
North Carolina.
Yes. Some argument over that. South Carolinians want to claim him. They say he was born just across the state line. North Carolina says, no, he was born on our side. We cannot read the history of our rise and development as a nation without reckoning with the place that the Bible has occupied in shaping the advances of the Republic. Where we have been the truest and most consistent in obeying the precepts, we have attained the greatest measure of contentment and prosperity. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay? And Roosevelt was a liberal. But he believed that. Okay? By the way, he wasn't the first liberal in the 20th century. The most liberal president in the first part of the 20th century was a fellow who went to school here in North Carolina at Davidson College. You might know who that was. He was a president during World War I. His name was Woodrow Wilson. Davidson College. Woodrow Wilson was a very liberal. He had a lot of liberal ideas. When I say liberal, I'm talking about politically liberal ideas now. Okay. But he couldn't get Congress to agree with him. He couldn't get a lot of things done. But Roosevelt, because of the war and the Depression, had a lot more freedom. Congress was willing to work with him more. He got a lot of things done that Woodrow Wilson had talked about doing. They were actually Wilson's ideas. So a lot of times you'll see where historians said that's a Wilsonian concept. That's what they're saying. Wilson came up with that idea 20 years before Roosevelt got it passed. So take another way from him. Franklin Roosevelt was an absolute genius, a political genius. Okay, and if you go back and study him from a political perspective, he was a genius. And let me tell you, he did whatever it took to get what he wanted done. Okay,
And he did it. He didn't bat an eye. But here's a man who's talking about the importance of the Bible, following the Bible. And of course, without God there's no virtue, because there's no prompting of the conscience. Without God we're mired in the material, that flat world that tells us only what the senses perceive. Without God there's a coarsening of the society. And without God democracy will not and cannot long endure. If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under. Ronald Reagan. Now they say Ronald Reagan was not a Christian and he wasn't a real believer. Really? He sure talked like one. Okay? Maybe he didn't go to church every Sunday. I don't doubt that. But I know some people who went to church every Sunday that didn't have his kind of integrity and virtue. And again, I'm not getting into politics here. I don't care what your party is. I'm talking about the person and their integrity, not anything to do with political parties. Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that those liberties are a gift from God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country. I reflect that God is just and his justice can't sleep forever. That's Thomas Jefferson again. I think I repeated that quote. I'm sorry. We have abundant reason to rejoice that in this land the light of truth and reason has triumphed over the power of bigotry and superstition. In this enlightened age and in this land of equal liberty, it is our boast that a man's religious tenets will not forfeit the protection of the laws, nor deprive him of the right of attaining and holding the highest offices that are known in the United States. George Washington, in a letter to the members of the new church in Baltimore, January 27, 1793. Because the question came up, how will religious convictions affect people's ability to serve? And Washington made it clear, as did others, that had nothing to do with it. Okay? Because your religious convictions may, in fact, make you a stronger advocate for liberty and freedom. That was their opinion. Now we're arguing over whether somebody who's a Christian should be able to serve in the cabinet, in branches of government, or will they be too biased? We see that going on all the time now. It's routinely asked of people who are being interviewed before the Congress. I'm for freedom of religion and against all maneuvers to bring about a legal ascendancy of one sect over another. Thomas Jefferson, letter to Elbridge Gerry, January 26, 1799. That wasn't his most famous one. We'll talk about that in a minute. As to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion, of whom you particularly desire, I think the system of morals and his religion as he left them to us is the best the world ever saw or is likely to see. Ben Franklin. That was as close to an affirmation as you get from Franklin. And John Adams, in a speech to the military in 1798, warned his fellow countrymen, stated, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passion unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Can that be any clearer? Can I make that any clearer? Can anybody make it any clearer? So, the Founding Fathers, as you see, were very much rooted in the concept that a Judeo-Christian understanding of morality, of religion and morals, they didn't separate the two. They believed that the only system of morality that would undergird it was Judeo-Christian tradition. Why? There was no other system of morality. Not that they were against new ideas or ideas being discussed and debated. I had no issue with that. What they were saying was, what do you have as a foundation? Try building a building without a solid foundation and see what happens to it. That's right. Yeah. There's a building on the campus at Ohio State University. Okay? I'm not making this up. You can go up there and see it. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It just escaped me, Bart. The something center. Anyway, it's an architectural wonder, because it has all kinds of interesting things in there. You know, windows that don't open to the outside, staircases that don't go in. Got all kinds of neat stuff. And they were having a tour up there, and the guide was explaining what this was. You know, it was about architectural wondering. He said nothing makes any sense. It's not supposed to. Doesn't go anywhere. And one of the people on the tour asked him, "Did they do the same thing with the foundation, or is it solid?" And the guide said, "Well, it's solid, of course." He said, Got to have the solid. They didn't make mistakes with the foundation, or the building don't stand. The Founding Fathers knew there had to be a foundation for this. They understood what the foundation of government was in Europe. They came from there. What was it? Power. Absolute power that generally was handed down generation to generation in the same family. And oftentimes, Power was conceded by blood, by wars, battles. And they would take over. There's a reason that Mary, Queen of Scots, was called Bloody Mary. She killed a lot of people. So, they understood these things. And they studied history. They studied the classics. They went back and looked. And when they dreamed of this experiment they called democracy, they said the first thing democracy has to have is a morality in order for it to stand. Because it's based on the premise that people will do the right thing. They'll tell the truth. They'll serve for the right purposes. They'll work together. And morality is what drives that. When we see each other as children of God, all made in God's image, we're all equal, then that's going to direct how we do things. But when we get divided, and the divisions we have today, if you go back, you can see the beginnings of some of the ideas that led to that were being talked about, but they couldn't gain a foothold because there was a moral system that said, we can discuss that. But that's not going to happen because our government won't last if we go that route. We cannot do that. And we've had, America's a young country, and we've had our struggles over a variety of issues. If you go back through our history, the 1900s were cataclysmic in this country. 1800s and the 1900s. You go back, because if you go back, the 1800s, for example, we not only did we have the age of the first and second great awakenings and revivalism, great religious fervor. What else do we have? Industrialization, which was oppressive to a lot of people. Slavery, which was oppressive to people. So industrialization, because it grew so fast and people had to went to work and they migrated from the farms to the cities, you had the rise of ghettos. Industrialization led to ghettos, where it came from. And people went to work by the turn of the 20th century, the early 1900s. You had children working in factories. There was not enough labor to meet the demand of industrialization. So we had moral issues there. And who spoke out against them? Well, church, of course. Of course, church split over slavery, as you well know. But the church continued to speak out against it. And child labor, the church spoke out against child labor in the early part of the 20th century. Washington Gladden and others led a movement against it and spoke out against it. When industrialization, because there was more money flowing, guess what? Saloons opened up. And whiskey flowed. And with saloons came, of course, prostitution. And so you had a movement called the temperance movement. There's a document that came out of that box that we opened up over there at Canaan. It's in that glass case you got, Ronnie, about the temperance thing. United Methodist, the Methodist, not United, the Methodist Temperance League. Because the Methodist Church had a temperance group. They all had them who's fought against these things. That was the church. When industrialization created a situation where there was a need for orphanages, who started them? Church. Church started orphanages. There was a home for children that started here in Denton and ended up in Winston-Salem. Y'all know that, huh? So there was a church saw that need. That was started by the churches. Same thing was true with retirement homes, homes for the aged. Church did that. Hostels, which were the forerunners of hospitals that we have today. So a lot of things created by the church. When the Depression hit, soup kitchens. Churches were doing all they could. I mean, there wasn't enough money or stuff to do it all, so the government had to step in. But we responded to the need. So the church has always been seen as the moral system that undergirds it. It's not that the church ever wanted the government to become simply a Christian government to do everything that we dictated that they do. That wasn't the idea. But rather that the government be moral and honest and decent and treat everybody fairly. That the government is willing to hear every voice, the believer and the non-believer alike, have an equal voice. And if people get to practice whatever kind of religion they want to practice, if they want to be a Christian, they want to be a Methodist or a Baptist or Catholic, or if they want to be a Hindu or a Muslim, can practice their religion freely without interference by the government or by the individuals. That was what they saw, the genius of what they saw, and how they thought it ought to be. The other thing is that they also understood that the idea behind and we're going to talk more about separation of church and state. That's a whole lesson we're going to get to next week. They also understood that it's not that they were worried about the church influencing the government. They were worried about the government influencing the church, because that's what happened in England. And we'll talk about why and how they created a situation where they supposedly prevented that happening. It's happening now because of the courts, and we'll talk about how we got there and why it's happening the way it's happening today. We will get to that next week. So those are some of the background here of what went on in that environment. These brilliant people realized, and you know, most of them attended church. They all read the Bible. They all had some understanding, even if they were deists like Jefferson. By the way, it's not true that the vast majority of them were deists. A handful of them were, but the vast majority were, in fact, Christians. One of them was even a minister. So you know, that whole notion that has been, again, remember talking about deconstruction? Think about deconstruction. You can make it say what you want it to say. Oh, they were all a bunch of deists. They didn't believe in God. Or they didn't believe in God the way we believe in, the way Christians believe in God. That's not true to say that. Yes, there were some. But even Jefferson went to church. There are records of people who attended church who said, well, Jefferson was in church today. Why would a deist do that unless he saw some value in it, something meaningful in that experience? He wouldn't have. All right? And of course, now you know, deconstruction is playing another role in that they're going after Jefferson, why he owned slaves. Well, let me explain to you that most of these people did have slaves, but they were not slaves as we think of slaves. Okay? In terms of being animals. They were workers. They were laborers. They were fed. They had homes. They were taken care of. Washington had them as well. And most of them sought to liberate them, to give them freedom within that context. They really were not keeping them up like animals. It is true that Jefferson had children with some of his slaves. One in particular, Sarah. And DNA evidence has proven that they're related. So now they have a big family gathering up there in Monticello. But they're attacking him for that. And they're talking about now, you know, doing away with a lot of the Jefferson monuments and these kind of things because he owned slaves. Well, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to get at all of them. That means all those monuments in Washington are going to have to go. Washington Monument, Jefferson Memorial. So, they had a big thing in Fayetteville that one of the schools there was having a program, and the mascot of this program was the Marquis de Lafayette. The Marquis de Lafayette, they said, well, we can't have this program. We got to stop it because he is the mascot and Marquis de Lafayette owned slaves. No, the Marquis de Lafayette bought slaves, set them free. He was a wealthy man. He would buy them and turn them loose. Move them where there was no slavery and turn them loose. Okay, so they'd be free. He never owned slaves, never worked slaves, in other words. But when you deconstruct history, you maybe say whatever you want to instead of the real truth. And, you know, he was a big supporter of the Revolution, was an advocate and a friend of Washington. And city of Fayetteville's named after him, the Marquis de Lafayette. So, you know, deconstruction causes a lot of damage. I want to separate facts from fiction. Okay? And that's what we're going to do in this study as we get more into it. Let me stop there. What questions do you have about this particular period of time and events that went on or things you've always wondered about it or whatever?
How much of the Constitution do you think was written, or do you know that was written by Jefferson? I mean, if you go to Monticello, they tell you, he was very instrumental in...
Vast majority of it. But I think that he had notes from Madison and Franklin and others that he incorporated in the document as he wrote it. But vast majority of it. Yeah. There's no question. Historians who studied that. By the way, here's the interesting insight that we've learned. If you look at the history books written before 1929, 25 to 29, what they say about Jefferson and Washington and all those people back then is entirely different than what was published after that. Because you begin this movement in there of beginning to reinterpret history. Okay? Beginning in the 30s. And if you compare the books, it's like you're talking about two different people. When you read what this one says about Washington, this one says two different George Washingtons. So, but I think he wrote the vast majority of it. I think he had input. I think there were a lot of people who gave him input into it, what they wanted to do.
Anyway, other questions? That's a good one. Thank you. I think you wrote the vast majority. Madison wrote the amendments. Okay, and that's another thing. I've heard people say, when Jefferson wrote the First Amendment, he didn't write it. Madison wrote it. When the First Amendment was written, Jefferson was not 1789. Remember when it was passed? He wasn't here. He was in Europe when that was done. He wasn't even here when that was written. Okay, I've heard people say that the phrase separation of church and state is in the Constitution. It is not there. You will not find that phrase in there. I'm going to give you the First Amendment. It's not in there. But I know people that believe it is. That phrase came from a letter. What happened was, in 1800, when they occupied the Capitol, one of the first things that Congress did was vote to allow a church to meet in the rotunda of the Capitol. You know what the rotunda is? A big center area, open area? To meet there. It was a non-denominational church. Preachers from all denominations preach. 1803, this has been going on for 3 years. There's a church meeting in the rotunda. So a group of Baptists in Danbury, Massachusetts, wrote a letter to Jefferson and said, you got a church meeting down there. Is this going to become a national church? Like they had England, right? And Jefferson says, no. Not going to happen. There's not going to be a national church. The First Amendment provides that wall of separation that prevents the government from doing such a thing. And that's where the phrase comes from. It's been superimposed onto the Constitution. And by the way, appellate court judges have ruled on that basis. The separation of church and state is actually it's not in the Constitution. But deconstruction provides the fertile ground to be able to rewrite it the way you want it to be. Not there. He was not there when the First Amendment was written. And I've had people tell me, when Jefferson wrote, no, he didn't write it. Show me, prove to me he wrote it. He didn't. So. And George Santa Anna, the great historian, said to us, those that do not know their history are doomed to repeat it and suffer from it. And there was a time in every American school when one of the most important things you learned was history. I read an exam that you had to pass in 1899 to graduate into 8th grade. And it was I had college exams in history that weren't any more comprehensive than that was. That was amazing. That people had to know that. They had to know who these people were. They had to be able to list the amendments, the first amendments, what they were, all kinds. It was amazing to me stuff they had to know to pass that exam. When was it signed? When did it go into effect? All those things. We don't learn history like that. Why? Because deconstructionism said it's not that important. Only our interpretation of what's important. Do you remember that when they had a big scandal a few years ago? They were going in North Carolina schools. They were only going to teach history from 1870 onward, and people rose up and protested. Y'all remember that? Texas, there's a group of parents got together, and they got all the history textbooks in Texas, every one of them that were used in the school, and they sat down with a group of scholars, university professors, scholars, and went through those books page by page by page, and they found every single one of the historical errors that were there. Over 500 errors. They went to the State Board of Education in Austin. They showed those errors to them and had the professors to testify that these things were historically wrong. The State Board turned, and they got media coverage. It's what got it done. They really had the media involved in it. The State Board of Education went to the textbook publishers and said, correct the mistake, we won't buy any more books. At that time, this has been 20 years ago now, 2003, so it's been 14 years. They were the second largest textbook purchaser in the nation, California being first. We're getting away from that because a lot of things now are like computers. But the textbook publishers went back and corrected every one of those mistakes. Why did they publish them with those mistakes in the first place? Because that's the few of history they wanted to teach. I picked up a world history book at Southview High School when I was a chaplain of the football team there. And one of the coaches, he teaches world history, and I asked him, I said, Coach, can I look at your textbook? He said, sure, take one with you. I got extras. I said, okay. So I took one in my office, sat down, and I went through it. I found a number of mistakes. I said to him, Coach, are you teaching the real history or are you teaching this mess? He said, no, I teach the real history. He said, I know the mistakes. I found them too. So, but it's in there. the fall of the section on the fall, one of the ones that jumped out at me immediately when I flipping through it, I hit it. That's what made me go back and do the whole book. Was the section on the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the fall of the Berlin Wall in history book, all the credit went to Gorbachev. There's no credit there to Reagan or any of the other things that happened during that period of time. No reference to that. Gorbachev got all the credit. He did do a lot of good things, don't get me wrong. But let's tell the whole story. Let's talk about how a détente came out. Let's talk about what Reagan did at Reykjavik in Iceland when he looked at Gorbachev and said, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to back up and we're not going to change our minds. And you're going to have to meet us halfway on this, because this is where we're going. He was talking about the START Treaty, the reduction, nuclear weapons reduction. And he said, and Gorbachev's problem was the Star Wars idea. And he said to Mr. Reagan, he said, Mr. President, you're going to have to drop the Star Wars thing. We will not drop it until we have agreed on what we want to see happen in these talks. Otherwise, we're never going to drop it. And he got up and walked out of the room. And Gorbachev turned to his advisors and said, I think that man's serious. They said, he is, Mr. President. He's very serious. And he got what he wanted before he left Reykjavik. If you'll remember that, he got what he wanted. Because they were scared to death of Star Wars. By the way, Star Wars was an idea on paper. It didn't exist. But they didn't know that. Because they didn't have people that were being able to get all the information they wanted from the United States government then, like they do now. They knew everything we know before we know it. About the time we know it, they know it too. Because they're in there. Chinese, same way. So, but it didn't exist. It does now. It didn't exist then. Because we didn't have the technology to make it work. We had the idea, the concepts. But concepts come along a long time before reality. So, Tesla talked about cell phones 100 years before they became reality. He had a concept in his head. Other questions about this? Let me stop there. Any other thoughts, questions?